Welcome everyone, live and recording, on the recording to the Great American Order, the KKK on Delmarva in the 1920s, episode 2, and we're going to talk about a knight with a K on the crusade with a K, and we're going to talk particularly about Dr. J.H. Hawkins and his impact on the Delmarva clan. Okay, I always start with a pop quiz. I hope you're ready. Can you, all right, let's do the best we can with this. And these might be trick questions, so be willing to admit they're trick questions if you want. But what does Dr. J.H. Hawkins tell us is really the truth about the KKK? What thoughts do you have about that?
Well, as we talked last week, he did say he did hit on, the KKK hits on a lot of popular, a lot of thinking that was in the culture at that point. Protection of the white Protestant belief system and protection of women and that sort of thing. So it's like he's saying it's wholesome. It's a wholesome group.
Mm-hmm.
Like
so he's really giving you.
I was just going to say family values, which became a different kind of phrase. Well, not too different, actually, a similar meaning later on. But
interesting parallel. Do you find that generally he is he's trying to offer sort of nominally, at least on the surface, a positive message that the KKK is for things, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what's the centerpiece again of the KKK, and who are they out there for?
Protestant white men.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But they also,
and of course,
they do manage to have I guess, some female support, as mentioned in those newspaper articles.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's going to be a rather sore point. We're going to be talking about that, at least briefly, in episode number 3. Is there a role for women in the Klan? Because that becomes a sore point internally for the KKK as it begins to encounter some growing pains. But we'll leave that one aside for now anyway. What is he doing to make this message more palatable in terms of what people might expect of a KKK organization in the 20th century?
Or are you talking about, they're giving money to people and supporting different charitable organizations?
That's part of it, yeah. They're out there helping other white Protestants.
Getting ministers involved to some extent. I thought I saw where they were having meetings at churches or in connection with some of the ministers. I don't know.
Yeah,
I think that would validate, what they were doing for a lot of people.
Especially if your own minister were supportive.
Yes.
And if he were the one that actually that opened up his church for a KKK meeting, that would certainly make the message a lot more palatable. What about some of the expectations people might have about the KKK based on what they may have heard about KKK version 1.0? How are they making it more palatable compared to the early KKK?
Well, since I don't remember details about the original one, I guess having making it seem in a way an exclusive group, in that you had to be naturalized, you had to meet some certain criteria, you had to be inducted into it, like that would make it seem important and maybe even a little, like, not exclusive in the sense of excluding, well, they do exclude other groups of people, but
Mhm.
making it seem like a special and exciting thing to be part of. I don't know.
Mhm. Okay, let me follow up on that. Let's pretend now that we're talking about the KKK in Saskatchewan, which we're going to do in episode 3, actually. We're going to go to
Okay.
Saskatchewan briefly. But you're talking about more, let's pretend anyway, that Saskatchewan at that time is pretty much white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Um, um, so within that construct, does Hawkins or some of the other people that speak on behalf of the Klan, are they excluding anyone within that subset other than possibly women? This is a follow-up, Anne, to your question about, about who could be a member. Would there be anybody they would not accept as a member within within a group of white Anglo-Saxon Protestants? Would there be anybody they would reject?
The Native Americans, probably.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think of Saskatchewan as being way out in the boondocks.
Is there anybody they would say, no, we don't want you because, and maybe not because of your ethnicity?
If they're of a different political group or an outlying,
maybe.
I don't know.
Hey, do they, let's consider one possibility. Do they want rowdies? Nominally?
No.
No, and that's what gets me to this question about making the message more palatable. How would having rowdies raising heck in your Klan meetings, how would having rowdies, at least in theory, be against what you're trying to achieve in reviving the Klan in the 1920s?
Maybe bringing negative publicity.
Mm-hmm.
Well, being respectable. They're more respectable if they're good citizens. They appear to be good citizens.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're supposed to be good citizens. They're upstanding people. They're supposedly the cultural elite of the community. But what if there were rowdyism, people shooting off their guns when they're not supposed to, and I emphasize when they're not supposed to, people saying, hey, let's go and vandalize this, or let's go and scare the heck out of so-and-so. Why is that against what Hawkins and other people in the Klan are trying to achieve as a national movement? And what does it remind you of?
Yeah, I'm thinking that they would want to keep control at some level of what's going on, that not having any loose cannons. I guess I think of the word, I want to use the word regulate, regulate what goes on, so that there's some, how shall I say? I can't think of the right word, but standardization of what happens.
Okay, because you are trying to create a national movement. This is not a regional movement. This is a national American, with a capital A, American movement. I want to get to this a little bit more, and kind of go back to week 1. Some of this we did not talk about, and I want to get into it a little bit more. Go back from what you remember, even in what we talked about in terms of the novel, The Klansman, and the film, Birth of a Nation. What was it that the Klan was trying to do, and how were they trying to do it?
Subjugate Black people and marginalize other groups that they didn't want to take leadership positions in the country. I don't know.
Yeah, let's go back to the crisis that we see in The Klansman. A very strange novel, remember, and a very strange movie, faithful to the novel in principle. Abraham Lincoln his life is cut short, and even in the novel, the suggestion is, oh, Lincoln would do the right thing if he had lived. But instead, by not being around, he's allowing things to go haywire, and they will go haywire, especially when the South when Robert E. Lee surrenders. And so according to the Klansman and the movie, what are we seeing happening in the South under Reconstruction, in their version of Reconstruction?
Well, didn't the South kind of reconstruct a very like a model of slavery, except it's called shareholders or sharecroppers rather?
Well, that's a little farther down the line, but looking at their historical model, and again, this would be in The Klansman and Birth of a Nation. You may remember in the presentation last week, you have enfranchised African Americans, you have carpetbaggers, white carpetbaggers coming down, and they will dominate the political system, even though they may not always be well advised in the political system, and they won't know exactly what to do. And so they're going to make a travesty out of state government. But to make matters even worse, they're bullying all of the defeated people, the Confederates of the Civil War, even to the point of ... How do we finish that sentence? The worst offense of all. Remember, the one lady is ambushed in her house, and she says, "I'll give you money." And the fellow coming toward her says, I'm not here for money. Southern womanhood is literally violated in that particular scene. We don't see the scene, we don't get a narrative of the scene. And so as a result of all of these things, being lorded over, being dominated by people who shouldn't be dominating us, either because they're from outside or because they don't know what they're doing, the valiant members of the KKK organize, and they begin a process of intimidating and even defeating by force and lynching the people who have now trashed the institutions of the South. And so that is the view of Reconstruction we get in The Klansman. That's the view we get in the movie Birth of a Nation, based on The Klansman. And that's the view that showed up in a lot of our textbooks. So
right.
It went, things went haywire, and the KKK came in just long enough to straighten everything out and chase those carpetbaggers back, strike fear into the heart of those Black folks that were trying to dominate Southern government, and then they melted back into the woodwork. Their job was done. Now, how does that compare to what we know in terms of history today about the KKK? Is it consistent with our notions of what the KKK was like after the Civil War?
Are you saying what they did versus what we thought they did?
So they're being portrayed in the movie and the book as these folks that are organizing to be able to bring things back to normal because there's been a terrible aberration brought about by the carpetbaggers who are exploiting African Americans. So now that we look at the original phases of Reconstruction, do we feel that's consistent with the history we have now?
Nobody was trying to save the Black people,
Mm-hmm.
the former slaves, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you look at some of the modern histories of Reconstruction, what you're going to find, number one, is that a lot of the people who come down or stay on, if they were with the Union Army, they're motivated by idealism. Some people had to be pretty idealistic to take part in this war, and they either come down or stay on. A lot of young women come down, actually young women to teach school, because you have a population that has been completely neglected. You have soldiers coming, you have soldiers helping, working for the Freedmen's Bureau to try to provide some sort of immediate and long-term economic security. So there are people that are trying to, in a sense, right the wrongs of generations of slavery. And so alongside of that, we end up with carpetbaggers and scalawags and people gone too far. And there may have been some corruption in state governments and things like that, although corruption was kind of the catchword in the North as well during the Gilded Age. I mean, money is going everywhere now. And when you have money going everywhere, people are taking advantage of it in bogus ways. But in any event, some of these good faith efforts to bring about education, some of the state governments, which unlike the view you get in Birth of a Nation and in the Klansman, these state governments, the representatives who were elected very often were ministers, people who had a college education, white or Black, and were serious about their duties, and in some instances, the legacy of early Reconstruction, give or take whatever corruption might have existed, were a set of public schools. So the notion that they project in Birth of a Nation and the Klansman, which did survive in a lot of textbooks into our age, may not tell the whole story. But that's the story that, of course, people who are likely to go along with the Klan want to accept. But we have a different audience, and we have a different period of history. And so we talked last week about the kinds of things people are concerned about. But the Klan itself, as it's being reconstructed in 2.0, are they going to be doing what the Klan 1.0 did?
Well, I guess if they were hanging people, Black people, they're still going to do a little bit of that. But I suppose if they're going to put out a big PR campaign as they did, it's not to enroll people. They're going to try to capture the audience through more upstanding messages, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
they're trying to attract people who aren't out there ready to, in theory, their public face is, we don't want rowdies, we don't want people that are out there at night scaring people to death and lynching people, because we're law and order sorts. At least that's what they're saying in public. So on the one hand, so when you look between 1.0 and 2.0, you are looking at, in 1.0, a terrorist organization that scared the heck out of people and killed quite a few along the way, either with guns or with lynching, and were finally put out of business, not because their job was done. They were put out of business because Grant had troops down there to finally get rid of them. So you have that past, and they're trying to sanitize that to some degree. But they're also beyond sanitizing it. They're saying, wait a minute, that's not what we need to do today. And that's not necessarily what we see in Birth of a Nation is not necessarily the problem we're actually dealing with today. So when you look at 2.0, and you've talked about this already, what really are the targets? If we don't have carpetbaggers and African Americans in government, corrupt in terms of corruption and things like that, and generally speaking, even though you're saying you want to protect your women, let's just assume right now that you have law and order in place in your local communities. Then how is the KKK trying to change its targets and its strategies in version 2.0?
Well, they were protesting, I guess, against the large masses of immigrants coming in with different cultures, messing things up. Instead of keeping a nice white Anglo-Saxon Protestant view of the world, things were changing up.
And who else is out there making trouble? You talk about immigrants, that's one group. Hey, what about Al Smith and all those people that work with him?
Oh, so politicians.
And what religion?
Oh, Catholic. Okay.
Yeah. So they also, and of course, it's a double whammy if you're a Catholic immigrant. That makes it even worse. But you've got immigrants coming from generally from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. They're not exactly, they're not card-carrying white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. Hey, welcome, Annabelle.
Hi.
Can you hear us?
I can.
Welcome aboard. What we're doing right now is trying to get a handle on the difference between KKK 1.0, the original post-Civil War group, versus 2.0. And we were just talking about the fact that, number one, the 1.0, as they celebrated in The Klansman, the novel, and in Birth of a Nation, they scared the pants off of the people who were trying to engage in governing, and in certain cases, maybe, at least in the view of the movie, endangering good Southern women. So they go out and with a little lynching and with a lot of gunfire, they scare the heck out of people, and they're going to get the upper hand. Now, when we get to version 2.0, we were just talking about the fact that the first thing we know publicly, hey, we're not a bunch of rowdies, and we don't accept rowdies, even if they're white Anglo-Saxon and Protestant, because that's not what we're all about. Marion, were you, or Ann, I guess it might have been you that said that, hey, we're talking about a better class of people, the best class of people and a better class of that group of people. We don't want troublemakers in our group. And as far as what we're concerned about, it's not the business of Reconstruction exactly. It's about all sorts of other people we're concerned with now. The masses of immigrants who are being told how to vote. We're talking about the Catholics who are being told by the Pope how to vote and what to do. And of course, African Americans who in some instances, they come back from fighting in World War I. They have expectations. We want to quash those expectations, right? So this is a different Klan. It is somewhat sanitized. They've added the burning cross, as we talked about. That was all made up for the Klansmen. And most of all, whereas the KKK Vote 1.0 was a small group of Southern terrorists, the KKK 2.0 is a national fraternal organization. They're trying to organize in every state. Now, that's quite a difference when you think about it. Okay.
Yeah, I was
So
fascinated. I was just going to say, I was fascinated in the articles that you sent out. How many meetings, gatherings there were in a relatively small geographic area. I mean, the Delmarva Peninsula it's sizable, but not like across the nation. I mean, these things are probably happening across the nation anyway, but you know, this county, that county, you know, adjoining counties and even towns within counties were having these gatherings. So it was becoming kind of dense, happening in a dense way. At least it seemed that way to me.
They're trying for penetration. They're trying to get everybody aboard who might be qualified and might feel that this message is a positive one from their point of view. And so when we look at Delmarva, we're only seeing the microcosm. One little piece we're seeing Delaware and one little piece of Maryland. So you have to multiply that, you know, across 48 states, and as we'll see, even a number of Canadian provinces. And they even supposedly had branches elsewhere in the British Empire, if you can believe that. So they were trying for a national movement, and it was not a national movement. The only thing out of the national movement that really related to KKK 1.0, aside from the robes, the only other thing that really, and the possibility of your women being abducted and enslaved or assaulted by the wrong kind of people. You know, the only other part of it was really all the robes and stuff, you know, the ceremonies. So let's look at Hawkins, because he's our spokesperson. He's our poster child of the KKK 2.0. And we've seen him come up in week 1. A lot of those articles were about Hawkins. He shows up in week 2 for our readings. Let's get to know him a little better. Okay, James Henry Hawkins, born 1876, McClellan, Virginia. So he's about, what, 45 or so. His father was a farmer. In the 1920 census, however, we've already seen that he's moved up a bit. He's gone to optometry school, and now he is Dr. J.H. Hawkins. And you can even see the ad here. I believe this is an ad maybe from, I'm not positive, I think this is an ad from Newport News, actually. And he advertised quite heavily to get business when he moved to Newport News. So that's going to be his base of operations, but that's not going to prevent him from operating in Delmarva, as we will see. Okay, now, we don't have very many details about his engagement with the Klan. All we can assume is that he probably saw Birth of a Nation, and when he heard about this organization getting organized and beginning to get some traction after about 1920, he decides that this is the right thing for him. Also, I might add, Hawkins himself was a joiner, like some of the people we talked about last week. He was involved, he was a Mason, an active Mason, and he might have been in another couple of fraternal organizations as well. So he had all those pins on his vest. Okay. By the time we get to 1922, Hawkins has become, quote unquote, the official lecturer of the KKK. So he is the evangelist, making the first case to the public about KKK version 2.0. And so he goes to Staunton, Virginia, in what is it? I think October 29, 1922. And he's going to speak about the aims and ideals of the Klan. So again, he's going to offer us a positive message, nominally, at least if you're a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male. But as you notice, he is extending the invitation to ladies so they know what it's all about, even if they don't necessarily expect to have a role in this organization. 60 people attend, as you see, 2 women out of that number. And what he says right from the very start gives us a rather interesting rhetorical approach that he'll use in future speeches. He says, no sooner had he checked into his hotel in Harrisonburg, the Knights of Columbus send him a message and say you're not welcome in our town. And they ask him to leave Harrisonburg, but he doesn't, and he goes and speaks there, I guess. We don't have coverage of that meeting. Then he's asked to leave town when he gets to Staunton by a committee of townspeople, but he refuses, and he says, if somebody wants to try to do harm to me, let him come at me if he wants. Let them come after me. I'll give you my room number, and they can come there and I'll deal with them. So how do you think this kind of approach may work to his benefit?
He's so fearless. He's stubborn and showing true grit by standing by his principles and staying in town to face them as, any kind of opposition.
Okay. And if you are, let's think about this. If we were doing spin control on the KKK version 2.0, and one of the notions is you're going after people because they think of KKK version 1, right? You're endangering and menacing other people in our community. What's the best way to deal with that? Am I bothering am I threatening other people?
Oh, I see.
Yeah, think about that. Can you formulate that kind of strategy? It's still used politically, right? Am I threatening other people? No, ... And what's the rest of the sentence based on these remarks?
Oh, well, they're attacking me.
Yeah. Hey, I'm not creating problems for people. You may think that from your knowledge of history. Hey, I'm not out here to scare or threaten people. In fact, if it's anything, people are out here threatening me, and I'm coming here peacefully. That's a great way to position yourself by then taking what may be a somewhat aggressive posture toward people you don't like, but then turning it around. And there's going to be a lot of turnaround in what Hawkins has to say. Oh, no, it's not us. Or if it is, they're the same as we are. And we're going to get to that in just a minute.
So
okay, what did he have to say?
Oh, I just have a question. Did he make up the fact that somebody from that Catholic group, the Knights of Columbus, came and threatened him? I mean, do we have any idea whether that's substantiated? He's just ginning his image up?
We don't. We have no evidence. We have no note. We have nothing that he reported to the police. Things are going to get difficult for him in another couple of months, but for now, we don't have anything like that. So he may have been absent. Maybe somebody came over and said, well, we Catholics here, we really don't cotton to what the kind of message you're offering. Maybe you ought to go. For the people in Staunton, who knows? Maybe they said, listen, we don't want trouble in our town. If you're going to bring trouble, we'd rather not have you here. But that's not the way he's spinning it, you see. Okay, so we want to know what the Klan stands for, okay, and who they are, right? So he's going to tell us now. And remember, hey, I'm a peaceable guy. You don't bother me, I won't bother you. In fact, but in fact, people are bothering me and they're threatening me and telling me to leave town. Well, hey, I'm an American, for goodness sake. Okay, then he tells us, did you know there are more Klansmen north of the Mason-Dixon than south? That is not KKK 1.0. That was a small Southern terrorist movement, remember. And there are more Klansmen in the north? Huh, that's news to me. And again, we have the emphasis, right? KKK wanted only the best men of the community. We don't want rowdies. And we're not anti anything, huh?
Was that actually true that there were more in the north than the south? Does anybody?
I have not yet checked that. You'll see in the next speech, he gets even more ambitious with that notion, I think. But he goes on, we're not anti anything. Then he goes on, but we're against people who want to mess with the government or public schools or the safety and maintenance of our American traditions. And again, how are we supposed to, who are the people that want to do that?
Well, certainly the Catholics.
Yeah, what do they want to mess with?
They want to get into government.
Remember that, well, yeah, because Al Smith is out there governing New York. What's the other kind of dog whistle that you blow for Catholics getting their mitts on something that they shouldn't be getting their mitts on?
Oh,
Well, the idea
it's
that
right there.
The Pope's going to rule everything.
Yeah, but in terms of our own institutions, what are the Catholics, what are they salivating about? Other than, hey, we're going to get into the government like they did in New York. Public schools, remember, they want support for parochial schools. So that is a dog whistle issue from the point of view of the people going way back to our know-nothing days before the Civil War. And of course, safety and maintenance of American traditions. Who doesn't give a darn about American traditions in his list of villains?
Any immigrants, they want to just bring along what they're used to. And that may change our culture.
Yeah. And what kind of countries are they coming from? Are they coming from democratic countries with free elections and everybody having a vote? And
at that time, where were they? Were they coming from Italy at this point? In 20s?
They're coming from Italy. They're coming from Italy. They're coming from Eastern Europe, Greece. Hey, those people don't govern themselves like we do. You know, so they're coming to, they don't know what it's like to live under a constitution like ours. They're gonna trash it, and they're gonna follow the advice, or they're gonna be so confused they'll follow the advice of their ward healer, who will tell them to vote for these candidates. You know, look for this on your ballot. You know, look for the chicken and vote for the chicken, you know, that business. Okay, of course, they're unflinchingly for white supremacy. That's not going to change. And then he spoke of KKK 1.0, and notice what he says here. It wasn't just a bunch of old Confederates that started this terrorist stuff. We had Union soldiers and officers. You notice? Now, I don't know that there's any reason to believe that was true, but that works for his rhetorical approach, doesn't it? How does that addition to our history make it more palatable for Northern audiences?
Well, I thought that the North is already there. He's trying to claim that They're already there. I don't know how well documented that is. I do know there were early, and this might have been what you're saying, KKK 1.0. Because I can't date this, but my husband's from Ephrata in Lancaster County, PA, and apparently there is well documented. There's a farm field right outside Ephrata that way back when had a big Klan rally. I'd love to be able to date that, and I can't.
Yeah, I'm guessing it would have been in this era for 2.0, because the Klan was, again, operating. Now, that doesn't say that there were not intimidation, lynchings, things like that, necessarily, as there were in Delmarva, even though Delmarva was not part of the Confederacy. But it's interesting that he's saying, hey, you think the Klan is a Southern organization. Well, even back in 1.0, it was kind of not just Southern, because some of the Union soldiers even joined up with us when they realized how crazy things were getting. Again, I'm not sure if that has any historical basis. And then he goes on, if it weren't for the KKK having put down all this nonsense, white civilization would have gone down the tubes. It was just the beginning. So in other words, the revolution that the scallywags and the carpetbaggers and African Americans were trying to foment in the South would have spread, and we would have been a different country. I mean, that's kind of what he's suggesting here. Then he finally, just so we know where we stand with all those immigrants, and this sounds like something right out of the Know Nothings. Citizenship is a privileged. We should, any alien that comes, we should charge them a fee so they can, to support Americanization schools. And aliens, after so many years, who don't learn to speak and read English within 5 years, send them home, because they don't really, or they're not vested in living in the United States. You know, this is a country for English-speaking people. And he says, labor unions, no problem in principle, but they shouldn't allow propagandists and agitators to join their number. And as you'll recall from last week, there was a famous movie on this subject. So that's the message he's offering in Staunton, Virginia. And then we move up to July. We find him in Kentucky. It looks, I think, I recall he might have stopped in Louisville. He stopped in Frankfurt, where the Klan members went to the top of a hill, put up their cross, and set it aflame. Remember, that's the traditional way you were to use the cross, going to the top of the mountain and setting it aflame in the old Scottish tradition. And then if you really want to use your guns, hey, you can shoot off your guns once you set the cross aflame. In July, he's at Lexington as the...
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. But
no, go ahead.
I was just thinking, I was looking at the photo that you have up there, and the part of the uniform, I'll call it, covering the face. I'm curious about that. Why wouldn't they want to say, I'm part of this, aren't I great, rather than hiding their face? Do you have a thought on that?
Any thoughts from all of you?
Anonymity. Yeah, they're hiding. Definitely.
But why? Why, if there's proclaiming that they're the saviors of our country, why wouldn't they want people to know who they are?
Yeah, well, that's I think part of it is however the Klansmen looked originally, they had masks, and maybe they're trying to retain that. Could they be trying to also, they're not quite confident that this movement is what they think it is. So they'd rather not be recognized for now.
All right.
But it's hard to say, because you're very right, Ann. That's a contradiction. You know, they should not have a mask on. They should be proud of the way they look, you know, that they're members of the community. I don't know of any other fraternal organization that's publicly in masks, although they,
Yeah.
of course, do a lot behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, just something
Okay,
that
so
came to my mind, and I thought,
Well,
it's a good point.
when he talks about, one of the things you sent out this week had this clipping from the Marylander and Herald. And this, I think, is dated January of 24. We enlarged it as much as we could. And then with the help of a magnifying glass, I was able to read most of it. And I like this comment in the middle of the column called "The Real Objective." And political parties will be forgotten by the bureaus whose slogan will be "America First." That sort of jumped off the page.
Yeah.
America First. There it is.
America First. Yeah.
And the goal,
And remember, that was
the goal of the Klan is a Christian citizenship, etc. It goes on, and it's just too difficult to read in detail. That America First sort of jumped off the page there.
And where had they heard that in? You don't have to go very far back in history. This America First, I think, had a great deal of relevance during the period leading up to the Great War. We don't want to get caught up in all that squabbling in Europe if we can help it. That's their problem. You know, we have our own priorities here in the United States, and that would apply, of course, after the war as well. Hey, we did what we had to do. We're home. You know, we don't want to get too caught up in this nonsense, you know, across the sea. Okay. Again, he says, I'm not against the Jews. I'm not against the Catholics. I'm not against Negroes. He said, though we are a white man's country, and the Klan would never endorse political leadership on the part of Negroes. I've taken out a couple of sentences where he talks about incapacity. You can read those later on if you want. But anyway, he says, then he goes on and he says, hey, we aren't involved in tarring and feathering people. That actually came from some reports about the Klan 2.0 even. But he says, oh, no, that's not true. That's just hostile propaganda. And then he says, wherever the Klan operates, we don't do lynchings. We'll talk about that record next week a little more carefully. Again, the KKK was formed in the first place to right a wrong. And that was done at an important part of US history. And he goes back to this idea, if the KKK hadn't done what it had done, what it did, our nation would be quite different as a whole from what it is today. Meaning that somehow the things that were going on in Reconstruction would spread across the U.S. and the U.S. would be in a mess. Then he goes on. He says, "We're going to send an organizer to Lexington to get your memberships." And he also goes on to say, "There's a local Mason who says it's incompatible for a Mason to be a Klansman. I'll be happy to debate them." And one thing we find out about Hawkins is he never shies from a debate. He never shies from a debate. Annabelle, you have your microphone off if that's what you want. Anyway, okay.
she's on the phone. She's speaking on the phone.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. So September, again, he's going on and on about people who are falsifying the Klan. And he explains that the 80% of the US papers, like those owned by the Hungarian Pulitzer, are foreign owned. He also notes that Hearst, even though he's not one of those Eastern Europeans, he's firing employees who are not organizing for his political interests. And then he goes on and says, the Klan were not scalawags, but they were going against a hellish band of free slaves who threatened wives and daughters. And then when the Klan got the job done and got everything back in balance, they disbanded. Then he goes on, he says, we started 2.0 under Mr. Simmons and a few old vets that were still around of the original KKK for concerns that you can find on either side of the Mason-Dixon line. And now he says there are double the number of KKK members north of the Mason-Dixon line than south of the Mason-Dixon line. Again, we don't know. Then he goes on to this idea, Catholics and Jews are exclusive. They have their own organizations that don't allow others in. So why can't we be exclusive? Again, all these immigrants that have arrived in the last few decades, most of whom have never learned to read or write English. And then he says, yeah, we believe in the melting pot, but even a melting pot needs to be cleaned out once in a while. And we certainly want to get rid of Bolsheviks and Soviets in that melting pot. And then his point about African Americans is rather interesting. He says, hey, they can be as proud as they want to of their background and their past, and they can make as much of themselves as they want to, but they're not going to cross bloodlines. That's the color line for him. And of course, they're not going to get into politics. When he says make as much of themselves as they can, what do you think he might be referring to there?
To get educated.
Annabelle, you're still educated. They've gone to some universities that are not segregated. They've gone to HBCUs. They've gone to seminaries. You have an educational advancement for many people. And what about commercially?
They can go into business.
Mm-hmm. They've created very strong business communities.
But we don't want them in our white stores.
Not necessarily, because they have their own stores, right? Remember, the idea was parallel development, just like, schools and train cars for each group.
The old separate.
But
I was going to say that.
And remember, this in a way is a response to, a thriving African-American community in New York, a thriving African-American community in Atlanta, and at least at one time before the massacre, a thriving African-American community in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The Black Wall Street before it was burned off the face of the earth. So he's referring to some of these things then. Yeah, African-Americans can take pride in achievements. They can advance themselves, just stay out of our way and don't try to interfere with the political process. And then he even throws in the Japanese, on the other coast, they're, we have to look out for them too, because they're threatening to enslave our women and send them into servitude, in a white slavery ring. So he wants members then who respect womanhood, who don't curse around women, and are not bootlegging. Notice that? You can't even have a toot if you're a member of the KKK as far as he's concerned. And we will hope that by doing what we're doing, women can sleep in peace knowing that their children are safe. So there's another formulation of the message.
Somebody once pointed out to me, now this would be more in the Reconstruction era, that the whites are so afraid of the blacks. And this just a couple of decades after they welcomed them into their southern plantations as nannies for their kids, cooks, butlers, and they were, good old Uncle Joe with his, and they were welcomed, the house servants, not the field servants, slaves, of course, but and then once they're freed, then they're a threat. Oh, we don't want them anywhere near our people. Funny turnaround in fairly short time.
Yeah, but keep in mind too that they still need labor in their fields, and they still need people helping them out at home. So it hasn't changed completely. But anyway, so we find, at least I've found so far, the first Delmarva stirrings of the Klan at the end of 1922 in Dover. Well, actually quite early on in 1922 in Dover and Laurel. And here's that marketing technique we talked about earlier. Two Klansmen come down the aisle in their regalia during a church service, and they are depositing an envelope of $31 for a needy family. Oh, isn't that nice? See, they're not shooting up towns. They're here to help communities, and they're members of the community helping communities. And then they distribute leaflets all over the place at night. And this was the leaflet that I have here. I don't know if I can read all of this here, but membership in the Klan binds people together in the spirit of service. It is opposed to everything contrary to Americanism. It works legally and morally. It is an active Protestant organization with strong backing. And it goes on, we believe in the unhampered maintenance of all American institutions. And we believe in right and law enforcement and justice. Membership open to all. Just fill out this form and send it to box 351 Dover, Delaware. So again, it sounds like a reasonably positive organization. And they're, after all, already benefiting the community. Sounds good to me. Let's go ahead and join up. So
I wonder if they would have. No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No. I wonder what they would have said if that $31 to help a poor family had gone to a poor Black family. Or was that only for a poor white family? They don't quite say that, but I gotta wonder.
We're looking out after each other, because after all, those other groups, they only look after themselves. Those Knights of Columbus and those Catholics, are they looking after non-Catholics? Are those Jews looking after people that don't go to the temple? Are those immigrants, helping anybody outside Chinatown or outside Little Italy? Nah. We got to look after ourselves. What you see here in the picture is the kind of standard handbill that I believe that they passed out when Hawkins was coming into town. And again, you've seen the Klan is talked about, but it's slandered. Hear the truth. Everybody is welcome. A special invitation to the ladies. So the husbands, the women will not be suspicious of this organization. And they even throw in music in Westminster. The local orchestra is going to play for them. Okay. Anyway, in Maryland, we see Snow Hill on October 21st. Another orator on the behalf of the Klan, Marshburn of Atlanta. He says, Americanism is not hyphenated. December 19, Hawkins speaks about the truth of the KKK. So we hear more of the same from him in Denton. Then in the Baltimore Sun, December 20, Hawkins has asked Governor Ritchie for use of the Armory for a speech in January by the man himself, the emperor and former imperial wizard of the Klan. Now, why is he a former imperial wizard? We'll get into that a little bit next week. Okay, then we get into a pretty active recruiting season in early 1923. And this is where we really see kind of a high watermark, I believe, of the Klan in Delmarva. We have Seaford, Again, handbills, and then a rally, not a rally, but an information meeting. Pocomoke in March. They've also apparently might have gone around that time to the Virginia Delmarva, the Princess Anne later in the month, Georgetown on the 24th, or the 24th was Princess Anne again, which was probably a follow-up where they actually initiated members. Then on the 9th, Helen Jackson speaks. Sometimes she speaks with Hawkins, sometimes without. Helen Jackson represented herself as a former nun who managed to shake away the trappings of Catholicism and the domination of the Pope. And so she's speaking, she gives church speeches about how awful Catholicism was. But she's she does it in tandem with the Klan and sells her book and some statues of Klansmen that she retails after these meetings whenever she's there. On the 14th, Crisfield has a combined Klan march. So the members have already been naturalized, and they represent 2 or 3, I think, towns in Somerset County. A few later that month, Hawkins goes to Deal Island, so he's making his way out to rural areas. On the 6th, there's a Thanksgiving service ordered by Imperial Wizard Evans, because there's the end to dissension within the Klan, which is what we'll get to next week. Now we're all, the Klan there's no longer any internal dissension in the Klan. Hawkins goes to Delmar on the 19th, or rather, that's the 6th also. Then Georgetown, where a flag is presented, an American flag is presented to a high school, going back to Deal Island, probably to follow up and inaugurate, or rather naturalize new Klan members. Then on the 28th of May, Hawkins, to celebrate, I think, the anniversary of the KKK. No, I'm sorry. I'm not sure why he's doing this, but anyway, on the 28th, he's asking all the clans on Delmarva to burn crosses at exactly 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So I've given a list here. You can see the ones he's approaching where they have local clans in Delaware, Newark, Middletown, Dover, Lewis, Laurel, Greenwood, Selbyville, Newport, Newcastle, Smyrna, Milton, Fenton, Bridgeville, Delmar. I missed one there. Eastern Shore, Maryland include Elkton, St. Michael's, Denton, Cambridge, Pocomoke, what else? Princess Anne, Chesapeake City, Galena, Federalsburg, I don't know if that's East Newmarket, Deals Island, Snow Hill, Salisbury, Marion, and Ewell. So that's quite an interesting perspective on the number of clans that were already organized. In other words, they had seen the speech, they had filled out membership applications, and probably on the second visit, they would be then given the chance to naturalize according to the rituals made up by Simmons. Very highly structured, as we talked about last week. Then we get to toward the end of 1923, and we find an interesting thing going on that we're going to talk about in just a second. Independence Day, and a parade in Cambridge, because once you have naturalized most of your Klan members, then you got to go out and flaunt it, right? Everybody's got, now they've rented their robes and they've got all their regalia, and so they're gonna show it off. And so they parade in Cambridge. Hawkins, as you know, speaks, and the local folks have passed the hat to get him his own Studebaker. Quite inspiring. Then on the 6th, Hawkins speaks in Chestertown, and he will get injured, which we'll talk about in just a second. On the 2nd, he was supposed to show up in Wilmington, but he was injured on the way to to Wilmington on the road to Elkton. On the 13th, we have new initiates naturalized outside of Easton. And again, these are big ceremonies that very often then involve a parade after naturalization. You know, then you're at full force. You can go on in with, 30, 100 people and show people, what you're all about.
I'm guessing that
Chris, what's that?
I'm guessing that outside of Easton was what is now Idlewild Park. That, you see, that's beyond South Street, and that was the end of Easton. So, and that would, and that for county fairs for decades. That's probably, that would be my first guess as to where this actually took place.
Yeah, they just say south of town, so that could very well be it, Okay, then there's a parade again in Chrisfield. Hawkins speaks, even though he's still recovering from his wounds. August, he's in Wilmington. There's a naturalization ceremony on top of Penny Hill, including a cross burning speech by Hawkins, and a number of out-of-state clans are in out-of-state clans are in attendance from, I assume, from Pennsylvania and Maryland. And then Hawkins and Jackson, our renegade nuns, speak at the Methodist Church in Newport, Delaware. On the 1st, there's an initiation on a farm outside of Newcastle. The problem here is it's met by demonstrators who heckle the arrivals as they come into the farm. And then when the cross is lit, the moment the cross is lit, they charge the area, the perimeter, and there's an exchange of gunfire and fighting. Knives are drawn. 50 people are injured, including the majority of those with knife wounds. And you can see the headline there. So the Klan is actually now receiving counter demonstrators and people trying to break it up. Now, what had happened in Chestertown? Remember, I talked about Hawkins being hurt. He spoke on the night of July 6th. During his speech, actually, he's interrupted by, quote unquote, a farmer named Williams, who jumped up on the speaker's platform to denounce him, and the Klansmen grab him and spirit him away. After the talk, he gets into his car, perhaps that brand new Studebaker from Cambridge, and he's going to drive to Wilmington on the Elkton Road. But 1 mile out of Chestertown, we don't know how this happens. He's struck on the head and dazed. And once he's struck on the head, his car goes into a ditch. And we're told that even though he was unconscious, he has the impression that the assailant searched him, didn't take any valuables, but they took papers or looked for papers. Hawkins is found by passerbys, suffering from lacerations to the head, injuries to both eyes. So we are now getting incidents of violent confrontation. Certainly the case in Newcastle, and perhaps in this case. Does anything about the story sound a little bit strange?
Well, yeah, certainly some things do. The car in the ditch, now obviously that's if he's hit over the head, yes. But apparently that was not an unusual circumstance. I've been reading old letters from that era and earlier. And from just about this time, I had family members that were driving from Talbot County to Philadelphia and back. And they'd say, oh, it was a pretty good trip. It only took 2 days and 5 flat tires. We only had a farmer pull us out of the ditch twice. And this is so kind of typical.
So what do you think what would be your reconstruction of this event, Annabelle? I think you have a very interesting point.
Well, obviously, if somebody hits the driver over the head, yeah, the car's probably going to land in the ditch. That's a different issue.
Yeah, but what if there's no what if there's there's no one responsible except the driver himself? What you were suggesting. If you are driving along and you're in a hurry to get to Newcastle, and these ditches are right there ready to grab you at any particular moment, and it's late at night, you're kind of tired, you go into a ditch, and what happens to your head?
Well, yeah, could
No
be.
seat belts.
Right. And
You
the
know,
road,
I think
nope.
I think you're onto something.
the road is not paved, and if it's muddy, it could very easily be slippery.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if it's not made up
Well,
that he did slide off the road for whatever reason and got injured, but wants to make himself out more of a hero. And I came anyway, even though I was injured. I don't know.
yeah, martyr.
Yeah, and imagine what the people of Cambridge would have thought. They've given him this brand new Studebaker, and what does he do? He runs it into a ditch. Sorry, guys. So what does he do? He makes lemonade out of lemons and says, I was going along and I was just getting out of town, and this guy knocks me over the head. I go into a ditch, and now I'm suffering as a result. If we were to take him at his word, how could he be knocked over the head when he's on his way out of town?
Yeah. Must have been driving very slowly.
Yeah. Then somebody jumps up on the running boards. That's assuming the windows are open, and then conks him and then jumps off, right? Or let's look at how many of you have seen Double Indemnity, the movie Double Indemnity with Fred McMurray, and Fred McMurray's in the back seat, and the car is moving, and when the time comes, he's a passenger, right? And Barbara Stanwyck is driving him to the station, and Fred McMurray's in the back, ready to off him. And when the time comes, he comes out with his whatever it is, clubs him on the head, and then they dump him on the train track. So unless you had somebody already hiding in his car who jumped up and knocked him on the head, hoping that they wouldn't hit a power pole and that he would be expelled, because that's also that, assuming that there was no other driver, he's all by himself, presumably. How would you expect, knocking this guy out over the head, that you wouldn't be pretty badly injured yourself?
Yeah.
Something doesn't make sense here. But I think Annabelle might have cracked the case. Okay. As the year goes to an end, 1923, we hear a bit more about the KKK, but not as much from Hawkins. They asked for a permit. I think the permit might have been, trying to remember where this happened. Maybe the permit was in Delaware, but it was a permit, I think maybe for, I forget now where in Maryland, but Governor, anyway, the governor refuses, given quote unquote various difficulties that might attend such an occasion. They don't want to have to break up fights. I think this was the governor of Delaware, actually. Okay, then on November 3, we're going to hit them with everything we've got. A Klon vocation in Wilmington. People come from Delaware, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, and they hear from the Imperial Wizard and others. And the police are on it like crazy to make sure there's no nonsense. Then we get to 1925. Clans from every town in Delaware are instructed to burn crosses in recognition of the KKK founding, and a dozen crosses are set aflame across Delaware, and they even set off dynamite here and there. That's hard to believe, but anyway. Okay, so we're still seeing that the Klan hasn't gone anywhere, although interesting that they're only talking about a dozen clans that burned crosses. I think we had more than that number of clans what? Well, maybe not. Newark, Middletown, Dover, Lewis, Laurel, Greenwood, Selbyville, Newport, Newcastle, Smyrna, Milton, Fenton, Bridgeville, Denton, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So they've got about the same number. They've lost a few maybe. Okay. Okay. So they're still around, but notice how they're trying to now add to their impact by inviting other people and having greater numbers. It's not enough now just to have your own local clan out there marching now that you've naturalized your people. You want to have more people around. Okay. So where's Hawkins? Well, on July, this is in 1925, he does go to Delmar on January 16th. On January 31st, it's quite a skip. And August the 1st, he's in Long Island, New York, of all places. Again, advertised as the oldest Klan lecturer. And then he turns up also earlier in the year, in 1925, in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. He speaks at what is called the Dialectic Literary Society, somehow connected with the university. He speaks to, they say, 1,000 students and Klan members from Durham, because the KKK editor was supposed to show up and was prevented by weather. Okay, so that's kind of the end of our Hawkins story for Delmarva. But as you're going to see next week, he's going to move on to greener pastures. Okay. In the meantime, our Klan is a bit under fire now. People are starting not only to show up at these rallies and try to disrupt them, but we have editorials beginning to show up. Here's the Wilmington News Journal. I'll read you this in case you can't read it. The riot between KKK members and persons who opposed the Klan in Newcastle last night indicates the strong spirit of opposition which has developed to drive the Klan out of American life. Within the past 30 days, there have been 4 riots in different sections of the country. So this is not atypical, including last night's in which the Klansmen have figured. In each case, the Klansmen were the first to be attacked. It would therefore, it would seem therefore that as the master warned, for those who take the sword shall perish by the sword. The Klansmen are beginning to receive what may be described as a dose of their own medicine. While such violence the people of Newcastle witnessed last night is to be condemned from first to last, it might not be amiss to remind the Klansmen that they have nobody to blame but themselves in the matter. In the first place, the Klan is born of a spirit of religious and racial prejudice, a spirit that should never be countenanced in a country that boasts of religious liberty and democracy. And then the thing goes on, then the ending, where the Klansmen learn that this is a free country, when the Klansmen learn that this is a free country, where its citizens have the right to follow any religious creed they choose, and where its citizens, no matter what may be the color of their skin, have constitutional rights as such, then they can, with more unprejudiced eyes, see the error of their ways. In the meantime, the authorities should lend every effort to bring the leaders of the Newcastle riot to justice, remembering that violence by a Klansman or by any other citizen should not for a moment be countenanced. So your local paper, at risk of losing their Klan members, that's what they have to say. Violence begets violence, and we should be against all forms of violence, but certainly violent talk is not unlikely to lead to violent action. Okay. Then we have, as you read, on January 16th, earlier in the year, Reverend E.H. Jones of the Methodist Protestant Church in Delmar debates with Hawkins. Do we know anything about what Reverend Jones had to say? I don't recall if we really got very much detail on either what Hawkins said or what Jones said.
Was this the event that was described in that one newspaper article?
Yeah,
where
it's on the last, next to the last page of this
the
week's
PDF.
reading. Mhm.
And so basically, Jones said a few things that he felt were wrong with the Klan, and then the article turned into this very reassuring. Don't worry, we basically really applauding the merits of the Klan. Oh, it's actually a surprising turn in the article.
Yeah, Jones talks about the evils of the Klan, but we don't know what he had to say. The opposition argument as presented by the city press and other enemies of this powerful organization. And then Hawkins arose and proceeded to answer the critics and gave the real principles and ideals of the Klan in a manner that could be understood by his audience. Sounds like there's a bit of prejudice in this reading this article by the Marylander and Herald. Then they go on and say, the Delmar Klan is one of the best and strongest organizations in Delaware, membership of over 100, composed of leading citizens. And the organization has taken a prominent part in helping the poor and needy, including food baskets at holiday time. So
I have a question. So looking at the dates of some of these counter protests, that was pretty immediate. I mean, there were hecklers showing up pretty early on when the KKK started holding its events, its flag burnings and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, they certainly are coming out by the time we get to the middle of 2023. Now, earlier than that, I'm not sure. There may have been counter demonstrations in other parts of the country, but we see here in the course of 1923, midway through the year, we see both this quote unquote riot in Newcastle, and we also see Hawkins saying people tried to rough me up. So there seems to be now and remember, even the governor of Delaware says, we're not going to give you a permit right now. We think it could be a problem. So we're certainly getting, as you can see, by 1920, I'm sorry, is it 23? Yeah, fairly early on, yeah, in the course of things. But we also find that things are starting to, if in fact what this sampling of papers suggests, there may not be as much coverage, and which may mean there aren't as many events taking place with the Klan, which is another point. Let me mention this final editorial. Remember, you had an editorial probably from the same gentleman in the Worcester Democrat, and he weighs in after the March on Washington, which we'll be talking about next week. And he says, it's rather remarkable that the Klan are pretty much dressed the way those Catholics were dressed when they were inquisitors. That's kind of strange. You would think they would not want to dress that way. Then he goes on and he says, maybe if they really believed in US American values, they wouldn't dress like Spanish inquisitors, but they'd dress like pilgrims. And then he goes on and says, these people are imbued with a spirit that animate the secret Klan. They were Protestants. They fled a country where religious and civil institutions were not to their liking. And they were the forerunners of the history of Americanism. They were the progenitors of the people that peopled American soil. They declared, and they developed before the Negro was made a commercial being, provoking bloodshed between members of the same family and nation. Then he goes on, he says, as we've said in these columns, We have no quarrel with the Klan. We simply think they're unnecessary for what they stand for. There are thousands of others that disapprove, thousands of others that who approve of what they denounce, and there are many others who disapprove. They're fighting others not enlisted under the banner of Ku Klux Klanism, and they're waging war that they're waging war against. I can't give you a whole sentence there. We simply think they're unnecessary. There are thousands of others that have similar things they disapprove of, and they're doing this without having to be part of the Klan. We don't believe there is any whose potency with the Klan, that there's any potency, more potency with the Klan than there is without them in reforming men or administering law. We cannot agree to their self-appointed right to judge conditions and apply remedies. Their proceedings smack largely of anarchy, and surely this is not Jew, Protestant, Gentile, nor pure American. So notice this fellow we read from him last week. He doesn't agree. He agrees with a lot of the things the Klan believes in, including the fact that African Americans should be second-class citizens, and we have problems with immigration and problems with Catholics and yada, yada, yada. But he says, what's the Klan going to do about it? And are there other organizations that may better represent American Protestants? And here again, he said the same thing. Okay, so what have we seen over the past year and a half or so in part 2 of this course? Hawkins has had a pretty good year getting things off the ground using the KKK playbook. They distribute leaflets and appear at churches and schools, giving out packages of food, giving out American flags for schools, giving donations to poor families. Then they hold a meeting along the lines of the truth about the Klan, and that's where Hawkins is so important. And that's where they receive applications. And then the next time around, in the second meeting, the Klan holds naturalization exercises once they've collected the money, hand out the robes, and parade into town. And they stay in the news with more parades and burnings of crosses, very often in the latter months, trying to bring all sorts of clans together to add to multiply the impact, or have them all do the same thing on the same night. So the question is, behind all of this, was the Klan truly a sustainable organization, especially if they were beginning to have fewer rallies, fewer parades, maybe even fewer active clans? Because it seems like some of the enthusiasm may be fading. Because you can only, number one, you can only find so many members to join and become initiated. Then what do? The whole thing is driven around getting people to go through initiation rites and having parades. But if you don't have new initiations, maybe you don't have as many parades. They don't have much else to do other than parade around and make contributions. Although we'll see later on that some clans survived by being kind of recreational organizations with annual picnics, which isn't much either. And they're receiving more and more public opposition from Masons who say it's incompatible to be both a Mason and a Klansman for reasons that we looked at last week, where at least from Rudyard Kipling's viewpoint, Freemasonry was not limited to one particular race or religion. And finally, now the Klan is beginning not only to get people denouncing them publicly in speeches, in newspaper editorials, but they're also receiving pushback in the form of riots. Actual confrontations when people break into their ceremonies, put out the flaming cross, get involved in Donnybrooks. So there are all those reasons that may be discouraging people. Hey, we don't have anybody new to initiate. Why do we need to get out with these robes? Why do we, what else do we have to do? Maybe at Christmas we'll give some food packages. Otherwise, what else, we've made our points. Do we need to parade again? Besides, they're telling me that as a Mason, I can't be a member of the Klan. I gotta think about that. And I also have to think about whether I want to go to one of these cross burnings if people are going to be shouting at me as I drive into the parade area or the cross burning area. And then if they get through and begin charging us, I don't want my wife, my children to have to deal with that. Because there were women at that cross burning where there was the Donnybrook, and some of them supposedly, according to the articles, fainted. It was a horrible scene. And then finally, sometimes you go to something like this and maybe it just gets a little ho-hum after a while. And maybe people just got tired of it. Maybe there was a new flavor in town. There was something else they could get involved with. That happens so often. Okay. Any other thoughts about what you see happening to the Klan? How it evolved? How it became? It got to where it became at its highest point. Why it went out of business? It sort of began to stumble a little bit.
And yet, frighteningly, it still exists. It's not completely gone. It's not what it was in those days, but it's not gone.
Well, I think if you count Klan 3.0, you're right, Annabelle. But I think pretty much it's going to fizzle. And so we'll have to look to yet another revival of the idea. And a revival that'll take place, not surprisingly, at a time of great social change that people are going to respond to. And we'll talk about that next time. Any other thoughts?
Well, I was just wondering, was as we went through the Roaring *20s, did everybody's economic boats float up a bit, and some of the reasons that people got into the KKK, kind of just disappeared. Everybody was doing better, and there wasn't a need for that organization at that point.
Yeah. I mean, they certainly have no social agenda, do they? This is a chance for the better people of town to parade in favor of Americanism and perhaps to intimidate people that aren't true Americans. But they don't seem to be saying, you're going to take our place, or you're going to impoverish us. So that's an interesting point. So is there enough there to drive it? Hey, we don't like immigrants. We're a little leery of African Americans in their advancement, and we're certainly leery of those folks that follow the Pope. Is that enough to build a movement on if you're just parading around? I'm not so sure.
Well,
any other thoughts?
Charlottesville, they were yelling, they're not going to replace us. That was one of the big chants in Charlottesville. They weren't
we're not
wearing,
even in.
Yeah, as far as I know, they weren't wearing white outfits, but in terms of what they were saying, it wasn't all that different.
Yeah. Some of that was a bit neo-Nazi with blood and soil and all that business, but you will not replace us. Well, hey, maybe the immigrants, they might replace us, perhaps. African Americans, we sure hope they don't replace us, but that doesn't seem to be in the offing quite yet. But geez, those Catholics, what if Al Smith runs for president, and what happens if he's elected, for goodness sake? We might as well give it up then. All of that is percolating as we're going along. Okay, last thoughts or questions or anything?
Well, did the KKK ever get any big politicians? Were they able to get onto a coattail of any politicians? where did they fail at becoming part of the political life of the country where you can really make change?
Mhm. I think the answer to that, we're going to talk about next week. They did help to swing the vote in certain areas in favor of a particular politician, in an election. But it won't be because the guy was a member of the Klan necessarily, at least not in major statewide politics. But they might pull enough votes in a place. And we'll talk about that a little bit next time. So next time, let's see how far they go in terms of achieving their aims, whether they do have political coattails, how they are exposed by the media, and how they did begin to have to speak for acts of violence that were committed by Klan members, in spite of the fact that they said, we're just a fraternal organization. We're going to see how it ultimately does fail, and how that Klan will be out of business in the same way the Klan 1.0 went out of business. And we're going to see what happens with our friend Dr. Hawkins, how he tries to take the movement a little farther afield, and what ultimately happens in his life. We'll get to the end of his story as well. So that's it for today. That's my story. I'll stick to it. And I will send you hopefully a reading or two. And so otherwise, have a nice afternoon. And I will shut down the operation here once everybody has shut down their Zoom accounts.
Thank you.
Okay, so long, everybody.
Thank you, Philip.
Bye.